Welcome. Welcome to Module 3 of our journey through the Belmont Forum Data and Digital Object Management Plan/Workbook. My name is Alison Specht, and together with Shelley Strahl, we have pleasure in contributing and sharing our learning as part of the PARSEC project and, of course, our careers. The PARSEC project funded by the Belmont Forum. So we have some understanding of what's involved in being a Belmont Forum funded project, and we hope that this series of modules helps you succeed to the best of your abilities. But before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land and sea in all nations. We honour their profound connections to land, water, biodiversity and culture, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, in this series of modules, we've been using a scenario of your project workflow as part of the Belmont Forum process. You may be at pre-proposal, you may have been invited to put in a full proposal, you may have been awarded a project and you are just starting to get all your ducks in a row, or you may be some years on, because these projects may be short or they may be long. And the DDOMP is there to support and facilitate your work and free you up to be innovative and to make the most of your opportunities and produce really interesting output for the wider community. And you can see the key elements of a project DDOMP are itemized in the link below. What you'll learn in this module will be I will be discussing how to establish processes and norms, organizing team records, tracking your activity, making reporting easy, and preparing for publication. Now, as mentioned earlier in previous modules, we're being somewhat repetitive here, but in each instance, we're expanding, taking a different approach to these topics. So we gradually develop your skills and your understanding in these particular practical areas of the DDOMP and how it might best support your project. So first, I'll talk about establishing processes and norms. Now, we hope that all of your team has committed itself to joining the project because they do have a common goal. They do think your idea or the idea of the project outcomes is worth spending time on and putting their effort into. But it's interesting how the different perspectives of the team members can differ. And so it really behoves team leaders and the team itself to make sure that you periodically, right at the beginning, of course, is the first one of those points, where you make sure everyone has a common understanding of the project purpose. Now, they may each have slightly different perspectives of what it means to them. That can be very interesting for the others to understand. But the goals are pretty important, that everyone understands what needs to be done for those goals. So giving a good description of the project aims, requirements for those tasks and their contribution, and each member's contribution to them. Of course, this does need to be revisited as the project evolves, all sorts of reasons. Some of the hypotheses aren't proved, some of the data doesn't appear to be usable, you have to change tack, some of new approaches may need to be found, new opportunities. So it's important that these processes of communication with your team to do these tasks listed in number 1 are live processes, and annually in a multi-year project, I would definitely spend time revisiting them. Right at the beginning of the project, however, it is really good and useful to start with a dictionary conversation. Last module, I gave an example of vocabularies for community approved vocabularies to use to describe data and code, but it's actually a bit wider than that. Methods, processes do require some comparison across the team and to note the different ways people might talk about the same thing or each thing, maybe different languages alone, is very useful at the beginning. And to note those differences in a shared space can really save a lot of time. So at the beginning, have this dictionary conversation, define the terms you'll be working on and with, and record them. Words simply used in one domain may be completely misunderstood by another team who takes what they think is the correct understanding, works on it for 3 months, comes back to the group. And remember, most of these people are volunteers, and as in they've chosen to be with these research groups, but it's not their full-time job. So they have, periods where they don't remember everything, so they work away in their little, in their brain space on a particular project, come back in 3 months, and they say to the other people, here's the answer. And the other people said, oh, we don't remember that. That isn't what we meant. So do make sure the meaning of your terms are understood. That brings me to number 3. The best thing is to not assume understanding across boundaries. The dictionary conversation is good for fundamental work that you're doing, conservation, preservation, data analysis, genomic analysis, all those sorts of things. Terms might be important in a dictionary conversation, but every day, particularly if you've got multilingual team members that may partially understand what each other says in a different language, really don't assume understanding and make sure you take time to check points are received as meant. And time was one of the key elements to project success, taking time to make sure communication is going well is a really important mantra or guide to take with you throughout a project. Taking time is not always a bad thing. Think constructively about obstacles encountered. So if in your communication space, which I discussed in the previous module, you share notes and you say, one group may say, look, I've tried to do this and I really can't because of X, Y, and Z. Share with the team. And if you haven't found a simple solution, share with the team. And solutions can often be found sooner rather than later once you do share. And surprises may be in store, particularly if you structured your team wisely and with a bit of diversity, with a good bit of diversity. Sprinkle of diversity, more than a sprinkle. One of the things that also comes to the fore in projects is some team members, for various reasons, may be at any one time considered non-core. So I mentioned last module that you may end up with subgroups, as practically you would within a team. Hopefully they're still spread over countries or organizations, but there may be a subgroup of particular skill set, people holding particular skill sets who are working together for a while. And those team members should not overlook the fact that in a particular task, people who are non-core, as in not holding the skill set that they're using, at the time may have give them opportunities because they may have meaningful input. Now, you can do that by sharing at a broader meeting that should be regular, as we discussed last module, and you are exposing your work to everybody, and that may be an easy way to do it. It may be someone might put their hand up and say, oh, could I contact you next week? I think I may have a solution for that. Let them contact you, follow up and make sure, because those people team members who you may regard as non-core may be in fact very useful. And it's also very important those non-core members, if they're generally non-core, do actually feel they have a role. So that keeps them engaged. And of course, finally, if translations we mentioned last week, in a multilingual team, you may adopt a common language, often English, but that doesn't mean because people mostly understand it, from all sorts of different native languages. English at the moment in this decade is a generally globally common language that many people learn. But people don't necessarily understand the fine detail. And as mentioned, particularly with new concepts, take care to ensure, point 3, to check that points are understood. But also, if you are going to use online translation tools, wonderful though they are, you need to take care because they tend to be, certainly now, non-discriminatory. So they'll translate everything and don't necessarily structure the main ideas correctly. So you really need to take care, wonderful though they are. Now, these 6 points are in a paper that is hopefully soon not to be in press, soon to be published and will have its own DOI, which is shortly to be out. It's been accepted and it's in the production process in PLOS 1, which is a multidisciplinary journal, open access journal, which, if you remember the criteria for open science, this is pretty important. Multidisciplinary for transdisciplinary work, such as that commonly supported and promoted by organizations like the Belmont Forum, is best published in a journal that will reach people with those across wide discipline, with those aims as well. There aren't many of them, so that's one of them. Okay, now in the early module, the previous modules, we have mentioned the code of conduct. We have glanced upon it. We have suggested you need to put in a refer to your ethics committees, to research practice. It's within the guidelines of the various countries that are involved in the project. But these are some of the key points. And again, I point out page 16 of the Parsec DDOMP has our example. Now, it is only ours with our constraints and our ID and our project goals. So depending on the project, you may have different things you have to put in the code of conduct. What is very important is respect for team members and their intellectual property. That should not change ever. That means, as I've said before in the previous module, what is said in the room stays in the room. So while you are working, you should be able to develop a confidence that you can share your work, you can share your data, you can share your ideas without fear or favor, and no one will take them out of context, away from the meeting, taking advantage of the group and publishing them separately, for example. Or taking attribution for themselves when it's actually your idea because of this cone of silence that you want to have. No one would tend to call you out. So there are some bad stories. They're few and far between, and the code of conduct is meant to very much minimize or prevent them entirely. Authorship according to contribution is quite important. One of the things about team projects is you've got to define whether everyone's name is on everything or whether whether the authorship will be according to the people's contribution to that particular effort is released. So at the time of publication. The Code of Conduct should include policies for broad access and sharing, namely CC by 4, is it open? We talked about the different categories in Module 2, but including, and this is the plan ahead of the Code of Conduct, provision for appropriate protection of privacy, confidentiality, security, or other rights and requirements, and so on, as described in the project's data and digital objects management plan. So you don't have to second guess everything up first. You can put it in your data and digital objects management plan, publish that version after version as some of these rights emerge, if they emerge later. So you have got some time. And everyone signed the Code of Conduct right at the beginning, particularly for this respect for the 2 bullet points right at the beginning. If they're the ones, well, the first one you want, the second one is quite important, although it seems to be miswritten. But by having live DDOMP, you can say, well, look, it's in there. And if people forget what their rights are, you can point them to the DDOMP. They've already signed the Code of Conduct. The provenance of digital objects used will be cited in project outcomes. That should be in your Code of Conduct. And you should include the acknowledgement text, which includes the codes, the research codes for each of the research funders, and make sure it's not just available in the Code of Conduct, but available in the shared space that the team has, so that it's available as they publish whatever they do throughout the project as part of the project. So forgetting the strange bullet number 2, where I think the green should be after the black, we'll move on to the next slide, which is an activity. Now, you need to look at what I'm suggesting here. And it may sound a little repetitive, but we're doing it in a different context. To think about what sort of tools and options have you got to support your project to enable within project sharing, effective record keeping, and provide working spaces. Now, remembering the countries that are involved, some countries cannot get access to some internet working spaces. Some internet working spaces cost money, which is fine if someone's got the money and the project has the money allocated to pay for it. But please look at your team, and you've possibly already solved this, which would be great, but look at your team and see where they come from. Maybe some institute, I know in previous years, we would use some quite simple file sharing packages, and certain organizations wouldn't let their staff access them. They'd have to go home, use a private email to do so, which is okay, but you need to check all of that rather than be surprised. So I would suggest you pause this presentation and have a discussion, or think about it with the people that you're with, or think about it yourself, and see whether you're ready to go with this particular question. So I will proceed. Now you've presumably had some time for reflection. The next topic is organising team records. Now this is going to get quite busy, as will the next topic. So as I have mentioned in, or has been mentioned in Module 2, transparency of work in the working phase of a project is terribly important, is vital. So all project material should be open to all team members. So of FAIR, it's findable, accessible, interoperable, so everyone can get at it. And we often are reduced to using simple programs because not everyone can access Linux, for example. So interoperable is, you've got to find a bridge for some programs, and understandable. So you don't have to go the full hog with respect to FAIR, and good metadata, because this is within the project, but you do have to be aware that there are multidisciplines in this project, and as far as possible, you need to have material that, at least at the top level, has a description, says this is where you will find the such and such, and this is what we're doing. But also private to the team. So that was the question that I was asking for the previous activity. So think about your project and what elements are needed. Is your team multinational, working on the project part-time, which is, I've mentioned quite a lot, is very much in common with most research projects of this nature. Web-based sharing facilities are optimal, obviously, but can all team members access them in country? Embargoes may exist, or bandwidth may be limited. Sometimes electricity may be shed on a routine basis. So, if you're going to have online meetings, you have to think about that. Are there free options, or have you got funding? Do you need online working spaces so teams can work together? As in web platforms, so teams can work together, and there are certain programs that allow that. They're not always free, but some are. Do some searching, and multi-country, and other considerations. So as an add to the activity, see how many of those you ticked. If not, maybe you consider there's a list there that you could think about. Go back one. So document management during the project, given these projects are quite long, 2 to 1 year, but they're usually several years, people who are not fully employed on it, which is an important consideration, will go off doing other things. So however well managed your transparent place internet space is, it is really good if you can manage some sort of landing page to show what is where you will find things. Because as the project grows and you have different sub-themes, you will have, a folder for a paper being written or for some particular work. So it's not a great big mess, you will organize it. It is really good to have hyperlinks to get places. Now, the README is the very minimum of that. So having a README file that people can go to that's regularly updated is a very good thing. If you have a certain type of shared space, you could possibly have a hyperlinked landing page, which will take you to, which you can do in the README file, of course, which can take you to the sections that you may be interested in checking out or where you're working, just in case you forget. People don't always remember to bookmark things, but that also is another one that you can send in an email when you're working, to have a regular bookmarking footnote while a task is happening. Establish, just like the dictionary, it's a common, making sure you're on the same page. I mentioned community accepted vocabularies earlier. I would like us to have had time to explore them a bit more, and how to find a good definition and how to write one. But we don't have time for that. But establish a system for lots of things. So for dates, year, month, day, etc. So make sure every file either has the name of what it is at the front and the date at the back, so it can be sorted according to date of a digital object. So think of the web resource and how files will be discovered, and be very systematic about it. Year, month, day like that seems to be internationally acceptable. So that is one I would recommend, but there will be others. Establish a schedule and recording practice for online meetings. I mentioned in Module 2 that 2 weeks is usually pretty common, pretty good. 3 at most. A month is often too rare. The project isn't fresh enough. Not everyone can go. So to have regular meetings takes some diligence for some, but it does mean people can dip in and out according to availability more easily and not lose the thread of the project. Sometimes due to time zones, and I haven't mentioned that anywhere, but sometimes during time zones, we did in the paper, by the way, sometimes due to time zones, and we'll get around to it, the meeting organizer has to run 2 meetings, one for one half of the globe and one for the other half. That takes considerable diligence. You can swap, have a different meeting convener each time, as long as the meeting notes are good. And because people don't always have time to listen to a recording, but written, oral, and video, when I say recording, you get the oral and the video through the recording. But written as well is very good. And don't forget to capture any chats if you can, and put them into the written version. So, because they often don't get captured easily otherwise. So regular meetings, and also think of a system that will enable the majority of your team members to participate, well, all of them, at some point. You don't want to leave 2 or 3 out just because they're in a different time zone and they never get to a meeting, except at 3 a.m. Their time. It is very, very important, and there's a very nice paper by the Synthesis Centre leaders, the current Synthesis Centre leaders, about the importance of face-to-face team meetings. We are all conscious of the carbon footprint, of cost, but of financial cost as well. Funders are often wanting to reduce costs, but it's been very well established that in order to develop good relationships between teams to actually achieve active work and finalize projects or get over a hump, having face-to-face team member meetings are very important. And make sure they're hybrid, so that those not able to attend can still participate in a real manner, in a useful manner, and schedule it and get people to realise that, yes, we are staying late in the afternoon, but that is to allow the people from country Y to participate. Maybe start late in the morning in whatever time zone you're having the meeting in. Adjust to maximise opportunity for all team members. We've been talking about a digital object registry. That's a bit like the landing page, but it's more detailed. And keep it there. It's the register of all sorts of things, and has more than one page, shall we say. So I will go through that in a little more detail in this module. And update that digital object registry. It ends up being one of your major records of activity for the project, and is quite publishable. Use reminders and milestones to manage and track digital objects. So tracking digital objects is important. Someone might say, oh yes, we're going to do this, but it is good to have a reminder. So project leaders or whatever, and I've got a range of roles that you could adopt, can do that. So organising, I think that was the next slide. Yes. Yes. Organising team records. As mentioned, an online shared space. Now here I've got some suggestions. Your institution may allow external participation in some sort of shared space. Google does, a wiki might, and there are some others. Atlassian has such a thing. That is exclusively for the use of the team members. So don't forget, you've got to be able to make it private for the team members. And these are the sorts of things that you might have in this online shared space. And remember with the landing page, so you know what's where. Folders for example, formal project documents. The people who submitted the project see the project document, but the people who are party to it haven't, except via maybe an email that went around and they've lost that. So having a folder in which you have formal project documents that you can say, oh, well, we said we'd do this. Look at the successful proposal. It's there for everyone to read. Team member records, meeting records. I'll expand on team member records in a minute. Meeting records, such as running meeting notes. Remember, I mentioned there's recordings, oral and video, but there's also meeting notes, and they should be in a file. Who said what are the tasks for tomorrow, for next meeting, and revisiting those. So keeping that conversation written down and going out, and that includes the face-to-face meetings too. So, you would put PowerPoints up. So people who presented a PowerPoint at the face-to-face or at a remote meeting, those PowerPoints would go into the meeting record folder. So people could revisit them and use them as required. And output material, which, what have people done? What did we do? What have we done? And have a folder for that. Organized, so not just a dumping ground, but a guided folder. Of course, you will need another set of spaces for work. So this is what I'm calling task-oriented spaces for making a conference presentation. There might be 5 or 6 of the team members or all of the team members involved. And if you share the presentation, they can all have some input. Very valuable. Posters, same thing. Email, yes, they lose them, but to have them up here really helps. You can get rid of the drafts later if you need to save space, but always keep the final product there. Manuscript preparation, they are very important folders, as you might imagine, and can be very big. Version 1, after review 1, after review 2, and that sort of thing. And you may have to be there for 2 years or so, and after the project, in fact. So think about that. How will you manage when you've submitted that paper, you get a review after the project is finished? Think of a space that will allow you to extend it without additional cost, for example, or is there someone to carry the cost? And of course, sub-team project spaces and so on. Now, those little ellipses there are some of the choices we made in Parsec. That doesn't mean they are the only ones, but they will give you some ideas of what you could do. And as technology changes, some spaces that could be also used may arrive, and you may shift or you may add a space for some purposes. But don't forget to back up all of these, or to check that there is a backup automatically made so that you don't lose anything in your internet spaces. Okay, I mentioned, this is going backwards. Right. So if when we establish common team resources, here are some topics that we covered in Parsec. So project management, team communication, a registry of the digital objects we've used or produced during the project, document writing, I mentioned that, dataset storage. You may have got some data from country A that you want to analyse, and with the team in country B wants to analyse, you would quite happily share the data in the shared space. Once you're there for dataset publication and preservation, you might want a team resource for that. And you may have decided, and this is all in your DDOMP. So for example, so your DDOMP would record and does record your decisions about this. So project management, we didn't have one in Parsec. We had two people, myself and Shelley, and the head of the synthesis team, who were responsible for managing everything, different aspects, and it kind of worked. But there are other options, and there's one there that's suggested. Team communication, there are a few options. We use them for at different times. We ended up using, for certain people in certain continents, we used, where is it? We used WhatsApp rather than email. And I'd have to send a WhatsApp message saying, please read your email, that sort of thing. So you have to adapt and be flexible to your team. The programmers initially thought, or some of the people initially thought Slack was great. It is great, but then people have to use it. So when you've got people normally using something, however archaic or clunky it may be, you may have to bow to it in order to communicate. Most people like Zoom. Some, of course, lots of other people use different options than Zoom. We used Google Sheets to provide our registry. Document writing, we used Google Drive and Wiki. Dataset storage, you could think about Google Drive, which does have a lot of informal storage. Open Science Framework, which can feed into it, is another option. Dataset publication, community accepted, fair aligned repository, data and digital object publication, of course, it should be, and software development, GitHub, together with a thing called Zenodo, which is also a publication tool for data as well. We tended to put all of our non-refereed publications in Zenodo. There are community outreach, interaction sorts of material we put in Zenodo, and we have our own, got our own community to do that, and that would be an excellent idea for each project, for a project to do. They're public, they're discoverable, and you can sort them. Promotion of outputs, which is often very important, and particularly particularly if you want your work cited, which can be very important for some researchers, most researchers. So we actually created a website that was recommended by the research scientists, exclusively research scientists in the team. It was run by, according to the data management plan, really, but it was put up by them. It will disappear soon and will have to be migrated. But you might be able, but at least we could say, hey, there's a new publication. You could use LinkedIn, you could use other social media, get a page on some of these social media. Of course, I had a page on Facebook once upon a time, still being looked at, but I'm not using it anymore, but I could. These things go up and down, etc. So you can use an existing team or department website as well. As many as possible of promotion of output. So that's in the DDOMP. Now, team member records are surprisingly elusive. If you have a administrative officer in whatever, in a department somewhere or an organization somewhere that is affiliated with your team, they may well keep these records. But actually, when you're doing the reporting, it's sometimes the administrative officer can help with that, but they've still got to go, they've got other jobs, they've still got to go to your project. So it's probably a very good idea, and we certainly found it so, to keep team team member records of various sorts on our shared resource. So here are some elements. They're not particularly in order of how they would look, but name, their ORCID number, email address, institution, including the institutional PID, which can be important for reporting and for publication. Institutional address for Belmont is important. That is its street address, at least as of now. The country in which the person comes from, of course, is very important, because that's one of the goals probably, that you had to have participation. Funded by, it may just be by Belmont, it may be by their home funder. When I say Belmont, it's usually funded by the home funder through Belmont, but you may get additional funding. They may be they may be partners, they may be members of the project that are funded by their organisation. I mentioned University of Queensland, I mentioned Turn. We could name some other groups. Date of joining the group is quite important. You will have an initial set of members, but you may have others join. What I don't have there is date of leaving the group. And you will get a few people who will only be there for a certain time. And that needs to be reported as well, but also worth noting when you look at your code of conduct and you look at your policy about authorship. If you've gone for a policy of list everyone as authors, you have to think about whether they're actually there at the time. The role in the project is just a major one. You don't have to give the role as in, this is the technical person for such and such. I'm just meaning here whether they're a PI, whether they're a team leader, and in our case, that was a leader per country or per major work program. We had two. We had a data work program and a synthesis work program. So we had a country team leader who may also have been a data or synthesis leader, or it might have been a standalone country leader, etc. So we could, in order to get a group together to act on something, to respond to something, it was very important to go through the right channels to the right person to get the result you wanted. A member is just a general member, and they could be very, very important from the point of view of project achievement, but they don't have any high-level administrative roles. Postdocs postdocs were usually listed because they were funded, and therefore we had to report separately for them. But if you wanted to do career stage, you could do that as well. But this is mainly a funding matter. Social media tags. Your Twitter handle, though that is declining a bit in research areas, but your Twitter handle, your LinkedIn address, what are the sorts of ways, if you do a conference, you want people to know that you're presenting at this conference, we would tweet out or whatever, the fact that the presentation would upcoming, we've got a new publication, we tweet, LinkedIn, Facebooky, ResearchGate presentation. So you could choose how you do that, but it's very useful to have on hand when you are the person doing the tweeting as the lead author, say, for a paper. Because we had a website, we had a little profile on the website, the little biography, and we had a photo. And of course, some of this we had in the proposal, in the Belmont Forum proposal. But we asked for a compressed heading targeted series of pieces of information and massaged that for our website. We also, therefore, had a document that we put all of these in that people could refer to, which people could refer. Now, when you've got people joining, after the first introductory hello, when you've got collaborators coming in, this was a very useful thing to have. So that was very important. For reporting, for Belmont, etc. We ORCID is supposed to report the email, the institution, institutional address, country, were all important for reporting, direct reporting reasons. And of course, as I said, for people joining, they got to know people by the face. Oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, yes. So if you had a face-to-face meeting, you'd meet them once for 4 days or something, and then you go away. And you've only had Zoom, Teams meetings before then. It's really useful to have that backup of the profile to know who you are, so you will actually share your toys a bit more readily. Okay, this is a bit repetitive if you listen to Module 2, but it's a little different, as I will reassure you. I mentioned barriers. Barriers can arise from differences. Differences can produce different ways of knowing, different ways of communicating, of understanding, all sorts of things. So with your project, it is not a bad idea, and I suggest you do so and pause the recording while you think about your project, how many disciplines you've got, how distant they are from each other. So if you have an animal ecologist versus a plant or a spatial ecologist, they're not very far apart. But I would contest that an animal ecologist or a freshwater stream invertebrate ecologist is significantly different from a Python programmer in deep learning technology, right? So that's a long distance. Now, the point of that, as I stop putting my hand up, the point of that is that as a leader or even as a team member, when you're thinking, okay, this person really has nothing in common with me normally. We do have something in common. We want to achieve this project. But I may have to explain something a bit better. I may have to double check that they really understand what I said without patronizing. There's an example. Anyway, please take a break, pause the presentation. I will proceed in recording, and you can come back to me in the next slide. My hand down. Okay, now on we go to the next section, and I haven't worked out how to put my hand down, so you'll just have to put up with my hand for the rest of the module. I will try again very briefly. But anyway, the next section is quite dense. Namely, it's really showing you how you might track your activity. So, right, so I mentioned the non-refereed material that is a very significant output to talk about. Your presentations, posters, workshops, training material, checklists, what we call white papers, data sets and software. And data sets and software are getting better cited without this, but never mind. Certainly, refereed journal articles don't have to be looked after this way, but this is what we mean by that is in the group digital tracking folder, tracking the activity. And the order you can think about here doesn't all fit into the one slide, but here we are. Title of work, date of contribution or release, and some of these are Belmont Forum mandated, by the way. If the conference, name and URL. So when you report, whoever's doing the job of reporting has to add the name of the conference and its URL in the reporting. So if someone does this just after they've been to the conference, fantastic, saves you a lot of bother because you can just turn to this and deal with it. I am trying to go to location, it's also needed. This is part of the Belmont Forum and your funders, other funders, no doubt, desire to talk about international engagement and penetration. So they want to know, easily searchable on their reporting, that you went to some town in Japan, who the presenters are, and this is mainly the presenters from the project. You may be doing it with other people from other projects, but this is you as a team member of the Belmont funded project. So you put those two presenters in. Brief description, that is asked for in the funding, in the funding report, every year. We're talking every year for this. So brief description, just a little potted description of, such as the abstract of your presentation. What did you do? You've often had to do that in getting accepted. So use that, put it in at the time. File type, and this is important. It depends on how you have, oh dear, my apologies, how you have shared it. So it's, you may have presented as a PowerPoint, right? But if it's a poster, you may have shared it as you may have presented as a PDF and got it printed, or it may be online, same thing, but you may have ended up sharing it as a JPEG in a repository. Now, or the conference may have shared it as a PowerPoint, as a PDF or whatever. So it's the publication end of the file type name that the Belmont Forum wants. Sensitivity, is it open access or is it embargoed? The conference often might say, oh, well, and they do, all those people who've paid fees, after 6 months, we will allow all of the presentations to be open. That is embargo. So with the date of contribution, 6 months after that, depending on what the conference sponsors say, that would be the embargo. So that would be all. Otherwise than that, it's usually open access. If it isn't published by the conference, you can put it up in a separate repository, such as Zenodo in this case. Conference type, they want to know which sort of conference type you are going to. Is it a disciplinary-based one, which is great for making sure your quality assurance is there? Don't forget, because you've got the people who say, well, that wasn't the right way to do this. However, transdisciplinary brings it out to other users, stakeholders, etc. So, and that gives you wider backup and comment if you're on the mark or not. You will get a proper citation. Now, if the conference gives you that, for example, for your presentation or your poster, great. Anything else, put it in Zenodo, and you will get a citation as a result. And Belmont likes the DOI to be separated from that as well. So a bit of duplication. Then, of course, they also want the stakeholders. So who are the people involved? That's been a little hard to do, funding bodies and licensing or permissions. That is usually governed by the publisher, for example, Zenodo or the conference, and we usually say CC by 4 for that. We usually elect that. But doing it while fresh is really important. The person who is going to do the reporting will need this material. And of course, the more energetic you are, the better. Okay, so it becomes a hard job for a reporting person. We're finally getting to this one. Refereed publications. These are much easier to record because the journal tends to do a lot of the hard work for us. But with a distributed multidisciplinary team who publishes in a country-based journal, as they maybe are required to do, they may forget to tell us that they've done it. So things can get overlooked. But also remember that people who are engaged in Parsec doing other work engaged in the Belmont-funded project, this sounds like me talking to the Parsec team members, people who are members of the Belmont Forum project that you are part of have another life, and they may be publishing in their other life. So if they were going for promotion, they'd put in everything that they published. That isn't appropriate here. It's only the publications that are directly related to their project work within the Belmont Forum funded project that should be cluttering up the activity. And I do say cluttering up. So try to ensure your team members understand that, but also praise them for their wonderful activity. So it's a bit hard to say, we didn't want that, but when they're so proud, but really it's and encourage them to do another one just for us, just for your project. So with the refereed publications, Belmont asks title of work, participating authors, usually, as I said, just the Belmont Forum project related ones, because in the citation, the full citation, you get all of the authors, and you can see the full citation there. Lead authors, we had that. I'm not sure whether we used that very much, but it was important for planned papers. It was very important for planned papers. Note the next one, stage, proposed, in progress, being reviewed. At one point, we sat down and we went through the team and said, and we got 10 papers that were really looking as though they would reach a conclusion. I must say we got about 4 of them, but never mind. 10 papers, and we dealt with them separately from here, but this is exactly what you want. Proposed, in progress, being reviewed. So the paper I mentioned earlier, the one that's in press with PLOS, it's finished reviewed, it's in publication, so that would in publication mode. So that would be a 4th option there. Targeted journal, of course. We've sometimes tried more than one, as you know. That can happen. So that this is a live document, but this is a document that can be very helpful to a leader of a project or the lead author to kind of say, well, we're getting there, but we've really hit this stumbling block and we'll forget about this one. That's why we separated it off a bit, but we had all of these exercises there, all of these column headings. Date of submission, if you got to that point, now, this was very important. Does this publication, and not all of them do, even from a research project, have any data or code that needs to be published? Because if it does, then it's best to start early. So let's say at the stage of in progress, to talk to your data person who's been nominated to help in your team. The team's data support person can help get you connected to an appropriate repository. Start talking to the repository people, because it's going to be a trusted repository, to work out what sort of information and format is required. And so when you get your paper accepted, you're not delaying it by another three months because you haven't got your data submitted. So when data is required. So there we are. That's that one. Refereed publications are easy. Tracking your data and software use and development, as I mentioned, any existing data and code used to produce your work needs to be tracked. Even if it isn't, even if you decided that you won't bother with it. So it's to save other people. But if it is going to be used, you at the time record any details of licenses or acknowledgements at the time you access it. So when you've done all your modeling and your programming 6 months later, you can just turn to this and you don't have to try and remember. If you are creating data and code, don't forget to record any sensitivity in issues, record the versions so that you know which version you're currently working with, so you don't waste your time. If you're building on pre-existing code, don't forget to fork your code and determine the conditions of release. And we've talked about that before. Does it involve humans? Does it involve any sensitive data? Now, in the Parsec project, we used for licensing CC by 4, for software GNU and GPL3, just to help. So picking the right data support person, and maybe you have to bring someone in, is a real help when it comes to this. Now, because we've got a few slides here, I have put in here the data description track sheet, the details that are recorded in there, and the software description track sheet. Now, these are, again, reported on to Belmont. So data location, where you got the data from, file name, size of file, URL for source of files, and the date the data were accessed, data creator or owner's name that may have an email, the team member who accessed the data, so that you can contact them and say, well, look, okay, was this useful? Did you forgot this? Does it matter? And was it used in the analysis, yes or no? This seems a fair bit, but actually, if it's done at the time, it's not too bad. When you have a multinational project, we needed to get data from different countries. It was a way to say, yeah, we've got Brazil, oh, we've got France, oh, we've got USA, oh, we've got Australia. You know, that was important there. So we did that. Software description, again, much the same, except language. So what sort of language is the software in? If you read some of our published papers, you'll see that language there is a statement in the upcoming one about language being a little bit of an impediment for some of the coders. You know, if they have to change language when they're acquiring it, it may be too much bother for them to use it, and it's perfectly valid if it's a matter of the time frame of the project. You need to know with code the operating system configuration. That is quite important. And of course, the date the software was last updated. It was mentioned, I mentioned earlier that quite often software is continually updated by the producers, including you potentially. So when you access it to use it with permission yourselves, you need to note which version it was, and the date and or version number will give you the clue to that, and that's reportable. Primary software creator's owner's name and email, and the team member who created it, the usage license, and any restrictions or sharing limitations. And of course, for both data and citation, you will end up getting a proper citation for each. Okay, so operating principle 7, and I'll bring on, you can see these spreadsheets a little better as spreadsheets. You'll see these files a little better as spreadsheets in the templates that I've given you the link for there, and I'll go through them in a little bit. So what we've done to help you with this is we have posted up on Zenodo publicly the Parsec DDOMP project track sheets for refereed articles, unpublished material, digital objects, data, and code filled in by us, so you can get an idea of what such a thing looks like. We have also published with those we have templates, but to make it easier for you here today, I have uploaded the templates as a separate accessible file, which you will find, like an Excel workbook, those headings, those items on the previous few, these ones, as column headings on what is essentially an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so you'll be able to download them and use them as you will. You may find you have other fields that you need, but do look at the Belmont mandated, or when you do the first report, you'll find it out, what you need to put in, what is needed for the report. So don't take anything out until you've had a go with your first report. Okay, making reporting easy. Well, first do your track sheets. That will make the person who does a reporter very happy. So here we have, potentially a report every year. You might have a face-to-face, as in presentation opportunity with facilitated by Belmont with other groups at a conference or online, as well as those, but these are the required reports. And I say year end because it may be more than that. So each year, and then there's a final one. And what we are suggesting is you should set up reminders and milestones to manage and track all your digital objects so that you are ready to do those reports. So one of the things I mentioned, ORCIDs were required. Ensure your team members do have their ORCIDs. Now, some may choose not to have one. That's okay, has to happen, but it is really good if they do, because it's a bit of a win-win, because ORCID helps track and cross-fertilize different providers so that your participants, your members of your group, if they're researchers, can get a third-party accreditation of their research activity through the project. So just make sure everyone's up to speed with that. Twice a month, someone should check the tracking sheets in the digital object registry. So those tracking sheets are in that registry. It's usually a folder of some sort for the data and software access and use. And if using GitHub, ensure the fork is happening. Monthly, record all posters, presentations, it's the speed that these things happen in. And make sure you include the details. I did quite a bit of reporting for us, and I was forever trying to find URLs and cities in foreign languages for conferences in foreign languages. And that was very difficult, considering I didn't speak Japanese or read it, or Swahili, whereas the person at the time who went and presented would have been able to do that much more easily for me. We're hoping that the Belmont Forum's languages are more flexible than they have been. Okay, twice a month you might, oh yes. Now, as mentioned, how often, this is a repeat, all members of the team can update the track sheets, all members. They can be helped by their PA, personal assistant, if necessary, as long as they understand the rules. This is not an opportunity to say how industrious the person is in their general life. It's just about what they've done with this project. But if they haven't got time to fill in the conference stuff, they could be helped. But that would be just a sharing to that particular, they could download the spreadsheet the way you have probably. So all members of the team can help to do this, nominate if necessary. Okay, here we are, another activity. Make a fresh list of things people can do. You did one for straight DDOMP tasks back in Module 2. Now, here is another time to take stock, and it's almost like the project has proceeded, so someone's left and someone has arrived. Revisit all of those opportunities for contribution, not just the science, which I'm sure you've got absolutely under the belt, absolutely on top of, but it's the DDOMP exercise and doing all that, tracking detail, but also through that, looking and seeing where there are problems, I mentioned the papers that we'd, said, right, we're going to work on this. Because we'd recorded them and the people responsible, we could go and have a look. We gave them space in the folder. We could go and have a look and think, oh, nothing much has happened there. Contact the lead person and say, okay, how can we help you? And once you have some trust, they're probably happy to accept help rather than be too proud to accept it. Okay, so, have a little revisit of this, and I pause the recording and I will proceed, and you can come back when you're ready at whichever slide number it is. Okay, welcome back, or we shall go on after a little break and me not working out how to lower my hand. This is not the time to do it. So we are now at the last phase of this particular module, preparing for publication. You will hear more in the next module, but there are 4 items here I wish to discuss. Now, the reason for this being early and being repeated, and we did mention it earlier in both previous modules, I do believe, is that you don't want to be, fussing around trying to work out how, reorganizing your data, finding a repository for your data and your digital objects, your data, your images, your software at the last minute, just as you're producing this wonderful publication. So the first bit is committing to your repositories. Now, we've talked about Core Trust Seal, but these and the Lin paper earlier in this series, this is really the breakdown of what is involved with this, and it's in DDOMP 9, Operating Principle 9, and you've got the link at the bottom of the page. I've put a QR code for Belmont Forum Open Data Policies and Principles. But this is what you want. This is why we wanted you to think about your file size, your data set size, because not all repositories will support it. You want them to be a fair repository. Costs are within budget. That's why you've got to plan ahead. Now, you can't second guess everything by any means, but you might need, for particular sorts of repositories, to put aside some money to help organize files or to help get the material up. You are, of course, going to have an open access repository. That's very important. That repository has, and this will help you with selection of a repository, access and controls that are sufficient to protect sensitive data. The repository indicates their commitment to long-term preservation. They actually need to say that to get Core Trust Seal accreditation. For domain repositories, has third-party certification of services, uses English as a primary language, or has an English version for searching. Now, this is important. I mentioned English is an accepted global language. Most people understand. We're very fortunate, us English speakers, native English speakers. Most people have some sort of rudimentary knowledge, if not much more, of English. So to make it truly open access, having a language like that is, as the core business of the repository, is very helpful, fulfills the criteria, is compliant with or working towards trust principles, I mentioned that, and complies with all your funder requirements. So some funders may want a repository in their own country. Have to think about that. Okay, and we've got that in our DDOMP. So first thing, choose your data and software repositories early. Start a conversation with the folks at the repository. They can help you save time and stress. For a guide to selection, read Edmonds et al. That's a Parsec product, which I highly recommend. I should have probably done that before. Here it is, sorry. For a guide for that, then we'll go to the next one. Just make sure you know what Core Trust Seal means. So have a look at Lin et al. Again. You could have a look at the Core Trust Seal repositories, Google it. And as mentioned before, for a comparison of general repositories, see Stall et al. Now, in Parsec, and by the way, we've had 2 of those 3 links previously in these modules. Please note, we have in Parsec, we chose a few examples of dataset preservation. Dryad, which is a fairly generalist repository, as is Zenodo. But EDI is a more domain repository, and it has Core Trust Seal certification. We adopted that as our main repository with Zenodo as well. Now, GitHub allows development, and many of the journals purport to fix your code in through their publication procedure, but to be wise, it's important to capture it at the time you publish it, the version you're publishing from, through Zenodo as well, and there's a direct link. I'll show you this in a minute. So, in order to be discoverable, the data and metadata quality, and I'm using data most generally because it could be digital object as well, make sure you have applied the FAIR criteria and you have good metadata so that they can be reused and can be discovered and reused. So for reuse and you could discover it by a few keywords, of course, but to be actually discovered first, title, abstract, creators, and availability. So you want that first. And this has been nicely outlined in Gries et al. In 2023, whose link's below. Physical information, people want to know how much bandwidth they need in order to access this file, where you're going to find it. Key descriptive information, and this is what often gets left off. 3 and 4, in my experience, is often missing. You need measurement or sampling measurement protocols, how often you did it, what you did measure, what software you used, did you use a machine? So what is this data? Is it I really like to know if it's a list of species, it's a list of measurements, is it occurrence data, is it weight, some sort of other biometric data for a human, what is it? And then, of course, attribute level information about the data is often missing. People often use shorthand codes, no good. What are these shorthand codes? We want to know what the column name is. What's the data type as mentioned? Is it species list? Is it molecules of titanium? What is it? What is the range? How many years? Is it just a minute of snapshot of some output from an analysis machine? What are the units of measurements? All those sorts of things. Those 4 elements for good metadata are very important. Now, your repository, if you choose well, will assist in determining which metadata schema is appropriate. We mentioned 3 earlier, but these sites at Cornell and at the EDI, remember that was the repository we chose, have some good metadata requirement outlines for adequate reuse of your data. So operating principle 8 of Parsec can also help greatly with that. For software metadata, again, your repository will help in determining which metadata schema is appropriate, but in the meantime, and again, your repository, if it's Zenodo, well, there's not that much help with that. So you really do know, but GitHub is beginning to help. So here's Code Meta at GitHub for software metadata, and you can actually use a tool to help with that. But Zenodo gives you excellent instructions on how to capture what you have done at the time you've done. So that's quite good for that. So have a think about the whether you understand what is metadata and what are data, and we'll spend some time on that, and you can return afterwards. So pause, have a go at this, and see if you can decide whether you properly understand what is data and metadata, and whether your files, as you expect, will have them, which would be quite good. Meantime, I shall proceed, and I hope I shall proceed to the correct slide. Okay, attribution and acknowledgement. So hopefully you've spent some time, and we can look at attribution and acknowledgement. So I mentioned earlier with the code of conduct in that slightly scrambled bullet point that you might have a policy in your code of conduct to make it clear that attribution and team members will only be attributed for contribution to an output according to their input, to their contribution to it. But on the flip side of that, you must make sure that all team members are given the opportunity to be included as equitably as possible. And this may require some effort, particularly for those quiet team members who maybe have felt they didn't fit in, the non-core members for some activity. But I think it's usually rewarded to bring such people in. It behoves the leader of the sub-teams or the leaders as a whole to track team member contributions so that accurate credit can be given. And you can use the credit contributor role taxonomy, otherwise called credit, which is a bit elaborate, but as a guide for this, and many journals, when you're publishing a journal article, will ask you according to these criteria or a simpler set. But they will ask you, and they will reprint what you say. Did you read it? Did you do the analysis? Very similar to this. Check out Parsec DDOMP, page 17. We've mentioned again and again that you need to give credit to people's data and code, proper credit to data and code. Make sure you remember, keep it recorded on those track sheets so you don't forget when you're ready to publish, and make sure you give that acknowledgement the way you would like to be acknowledged. And of course, remember in the Code of Conduct, we had an acknowledgement statement, logos and any graphics that need to be included on some of your output, particularly on conference proceedings, should be easily accessible in your shared folder. So make sure the acknowledgement protocols with funding numbers, maybe sometimes a research provider or object provider with a raw is available for all of the key providers for acknowledgement statements. Okay, now I have missed a slide. I want to show you this slide because I spent some time on it. Is it here? Doesn't look as though it is. It must be in Module 4. Well, that's a pity. Okay, my apologies for that revisit, but there is more to come in Module 4, and I commend you to look at the guideline for equip and make sure, here are some guidelines here, ensure you have regular team members and adjust as necessary. And thank you very much for your attention.